Hey, and welcome back to another Learning Java 2D game programming video. So in our last video, we implemented the spreading of our disease. So now, whenever a person coughs, there's a 10% risk of anyone within 2 tiles also getting sick. And the way we implement it is we check for moving entities, and since our player is a moving entity, currently our player can get sick as well. And we can fix that by just looking for NPCs if we want to, and we might do that later. But for now, let's just keep it the way it is. However, I put this on, moved away from my computer, and when I came back, I realized that our player had gotten several stacks of this sick effect. So we never checked if the person that we spread the sick effect to is already affected by it. So that means that you can get several sick effects, and every sick effect has its own chance of causing you to cough. So if you have enough of these effects stacked on you, you will basically cough every update always. And eventually you're not even going to be able to move. You're just going to be coughing constantly. So there are several ways that we can fix it, but the easiest is of course to just check if the moving entity is already affected by this sick effect, and we already have the method in place to do that. So let's just implement that. Going to the cough effect. Let's find here where we decide who is subjected to this risk. Here we're finding all of them colliding with our spread area. But then we want to filter again. So we only want to keep the ones that are not already affected by this sick.class. So this should fix that issue. All right, moving on to today's topic. So I'm gonna want to be able to isolate people later, but to do that, we need to be able to press a button and ask it if it's been pressed like only once. This is hard for me to explain. I was Googling a little bit because I want to say click if a button is clicked, but Google told me that you can only say click for mouse. So I'm not sure what I'm gonna call it. So I'm just gonna explain. So imagine you want to press a button and you want that to toggle something. And today we're gonna toggle the debug mode because we already have the debug mode, so it was a good candidate. But if you want to toggle debug mode and then you press some button to do that, right now every update we're going to ask, is this button pressed? And it's going to say yes. So we're going to toggle the debug mode. And the next update it's going to ask again, and we're going to say yes. So it's going to toggle the debug mode. So it's just going to switch on and off really quickly. And that's not what we want. We want something to answer only once when we've pressed a button. So even if we hold the button for a really long time, only once should it say, yes, I have been, This is where I want to say clicked, where Google says, no, you can't say that. So if you have a good word, then please tell me. But for now, I'm going to try to name these as well as I can, which means that pressed is going to mean this instead. The way that pressed works right now, that's the way we want currently pressed to work, right? So therefore, let's just put the cursor on this, say Shift F6, and let's rename it to currently pressed. Okay, so currently pressed, and let's even rename this to is currently pressed. That way we can just remake this Boolean and have it mean something slightly different. And now everything calling this will have been renamed as well. So that's what we got from that. All right, so we have is currently pressed, and everything that called the is pressed has been renamed to this, so we can make a new is pressed, which nothing now uses. All right, so the way this is going to work is whenever we press, currently pressed is true. All right, but if currently pressed is true, but pressed is not true, then we know here where we check if it's pressed that we haven't checked it before. So then we return true, and then we set this to true. But if these are both true, then is pressed will be false. So it will look like this. If not pressed, key code, and currently pressed, key code. Then we want to set pressed key code to true, and we want to return true. All right, and if not, we want to return false. And now when we release the key, we want both of these to be false. So this should do the trick. Now, once it will tell us if something is pressed or not. All right, now there's another refactor that I want to do. So this controller, before this was true, you can see that it was renamed here automatically, so that's good. Before, this controller could be named only controller, but now these are entity controllers. These are controllers that we use for our in-game entities, our game objects. But toggling debug mode, that's something I want to be able to do whether I have an active player on the screen or not. So that input handling is not going into my player controller. And that's going to go into something else that I'm going to name a game controller. And that's not going to have the same interface. So a game controller and this controller interface are not the same thing. So I'm going to rename this controller interface to be an entity controller. And sorry, I probably don't want to rename those. That'll be fine, you'll understand anyway. But these variable names can be renamed, and rename the getter as well. All right, so now it's called an entity controller instead, which means we can make a game controller. And the question is, should we keep it in here or should we maybe keep it in here? Because right now all of these are entity controllers, in which case we should rename this package. I'm not sure. Let's keep it in the controller. It is a controller, and then we can keep the controller package name the way it is. Let's just name it game controller. And what it needs, of course, is an input. All right, sorry, let's make that private. And alt insert, make a constructor. Awesome. Let's also make the update method. So public void update, take in the state. So now we want to handle the input. And this is input, of course, not relating to our entity. So things such as toggling debug mode. So what we can do, should we have this? The state doesn't know the game settings though. So maybe we don't do the state here. Maybe we actually do the game here. So game, this is gonna live inside the game class, that's why. The game doesn't have a getter for that yet. Let's just go to our game class and see here. Here's game settings, and this is where the debug mode setting lives. And this is also where our controller is gonna live. So let's just make the controller first. All right, and let's make this game controller a new game controller. Takes in the input. But what we needed was a getter for the settings. All right, now if we go back into our game controller, let's say if input is pressed and say key event and find the virtual key for something that you want. I'm just going to use F2 for now. So if F2 is pressed, and that is the one-time thing now, then we want to do game get settings toggle debug mode, and we have to make this method. So toggle debug mode will of course do debug mode is equal to not debug mode, or the inverse of debug mode. So now if we try this out, ooh, we're sorry. There was one thing that I didn't do. I don't update the game controller. Go back into your game. So here where you do state update, also do game controller update and pass in this. Now let's try it out. All right, so if we press F2, then hopefully we'll see some collision boxes. And we do. So that's awesome. And if you press and hold it, there's no flickering, there's no toggling on and off uncontrollably. So this works exactly as we wanted it. So that is awesome. Just gotta check how much time I've used. All right, let's just do this little fun thing. I think you're gonna like it. So go into your game settings and we're gonna do something called a game speed multiplier. All right, let's just set that to 1 by default. And now let's do public void increase game speed, and it'll have a constant increase. So when we do that, let's just add 0.25 to our game speed multiplier. Let's make a decrease game speed. All right, and it decreases it. And let's also make a getter. So alt insert make a getter. Okay, now we need to use this game speed multiplier. And the way that we can do that is we can do that inside of our game loop. So here, where you have last render time in seconds, which is the current time minus the last update, divided by 1,000. It's used in this loop to find out whether we should be updating or not. Let's multiply it by the game multiplier, or the speed multiplier. So we have the game, say game, get settings, get game speed multiplier. And what we also need to do here inside the game controller is we want to find if this input is pressed, and you need to give it a key code. And I'm not sure what to give it. We can change these later. So let's just use something that we don't use very often. I don't know what your keyboard looks like. I'm going to say Y, sorry, VKY. All right. I know this doesn't make sense. We can change it later. Set this to whatever you want. So increase game speed. And then let's just copy this, and we need something to decrease it with. Input. So I'm going to take the H that is below it, and we're going to say decrease game speed. And now if we try this out, right, we can walk around as usual. Try pressing the Y. Try pressing it a few times. As you can see, they're now running around like quick little ants, and this actually works. So you can see that our time is updating accordingly. And I mean, what's happening is we are updating a lot more times per second, but how many updates per second we should be updating is still being registered. So this just means that we are increasing the game speed. So that's a fun little trick, and it's really handy if you need to check out how things are gonna work and you don't want to wait, right? So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you soon. Hej då!